Somewhere in the 2nd century, on a hillside in the north of Britain, Rome erased a legion. Not through defeat. Rome survived defeats all the time and mourned them loudly. This was something else. This was silence, deliberate and total, and for 18 centuries it has been one of the strangest cold cases in ancient history. What happened to the 9th Legion, 5,000 of the most feared soldiers on earth, and why did the empire that recorded every grain shipment and every discharged veteran choose to say nothing about them at all? To understand why their vanishing still unsettles historians, you have to understand what this legion actually was. The 9th was not some green unit thrown together for a single campaign. It traced its roots back to the late Roman Republic, and it fought under Julius Caesar himself during the brutal conquest of Gaul, one of the units that helped turn a general into the most powerful man in the ancient world. It later fought in Spain, in the campaigns that gave it its name, Hispana, a badge earned in blood on the Iberian Peninsula. By the time it crossed Britain in the 1st century, it was not a rookie formation. It was a veteran instrument of conquest, hardened by decades of war. Its record in Britain was violent from the start. When the Roman invasion of the island began in 43 AD, the 9th was there, and less than 2 decades later, it walked straight into one of the worst disasters Rome ever suffered on British soil. In 60 or 61 AD, the British Queen Boudica led a revolt that burned Roman towns to the ground and slaughtered tens of thousands of people. When the 9th marched to relieve the besieged colony at Camulodunum, it was ambushed and torn apart. Roman sources record that its infantry was annihilated, and only the commander and a fraction of his cavalry escaped alive. The legion had to be rebuilt from scratch with fresh drafts of soldiers sent from the continent. That the 9th survived that catastrophe and went on operating as a functioning legion for another half-century tells you something about how seriously Rome took the unit. A lesser formation might have simply been dissolved. This one was patched, reinforced, and put back to work. For the next several decades, the 9th appears in the historical record doing exactly what you'd expect a frontier legion to do, building forts, garrisoning territory, showing up on inscriptions tied to construction project across northern Britain. And then comes a piece of evidence every account of this mystery eventually circles back to, because it is the last solid, undisputed trace the legion ever left. In the city we now call York, in the year 108 AD, a stone was carved recording construction work carried out under the Emperor Trajan, crediting the project to the 9th Legion Hispana. That inscription is real. It was discovered in the 19th century, and it sits today in the Yorkshire Museum, and its dating is not in serious dispute. Somewhere around 108 AD, the 9th was alive, present, and functioning as a legion in Roman Britain. After that stone, the trail goes cold. Not gradually, not the slow fade you'd expect from a unit being quietly redeployed and reabsorbed elsewhere. It simply stops. No further inscriptions in Britain naming the 9th. No tombstones. No building records. And this is where the mystery starts to feel less like an ordinary gap in the evidence and more like something pointedly wrong, because Rome was not a civilization that lost track of things easily. It was, by ancient standards, an obsessively bureaucratic empire. It tracked its soldiers from enlistment to discharge, tracked its grain shipments, tracked its property. When a legion was destroyed, Rome typically knew, and Rome typically said so, sometimes in devastating detail. A century before the 9th's disappearance, 3 entire legions were wiped out in the Teutoburg forest in Germany, and the sources are unambiguous about it. The Emperor Augustus was said to have been so shaken that he wandered his palace crying out for his legions back, and the disaster became one of the defining traumas of the whole reign. That is what Rome losing a legion normally looked like. Grief, documentation, a response. For the 9th, none of that survives. And that absence is exactly why the theories have multiplied for 2,000 years. The version that captured the public imagination, especially after it was popularized in 20th century fiction, is the most dramatic one. That the 9th marched north into what is now Scotland on some punitive expedition against the tribes who refused to submit to Rome, and that it was destroyed there, swallowed by a hostile landscape and an enemy that fought in a way Roman legions weren't built to counter. It's a compelling image, and it's a story that seeped into local folklore in the centuries that followed. Tales of a lost army still marching somewhere out in the hills. But it is a serious evidentiary problem. Despite more than a century of archaeological searching across Scotland, no site has ever been found containing the kind of mass grave, weapons cache, or battlefield debris you'd expect from the destruction of an entire legion. Roman military historians who study this period are fairly blunt about it. The absence of that physical evidence is a real problem for the massacre in Scotland theory, not a minor gap waiting to be filled in. The competing theory, and the one that has gained more traction among historians in recent decades, is less cinematic but arguably more disturbing in its own quiet way. It holds that the Ninth was transferred out of Britain sometime after 108 AD and sent to deal with crises elsewhere in the empire, possibly along the Rhine frontier, possibly further east. There is fragmentary evidence, tile stamps, and inscriptions, suggesting a legion using the Ninth's designation may have existed on the European continent in the years after British record goes dark. If that's true, then the Ninth may have met its actual end far from Britain entirely, potentially destroyed in one of Rome's brutal eastern conflicts, such as a catastrophic Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea in the 130s, a war that chewed through Roman forces so badly that the Emperor Hadrian is said to have dropped the customary formal greeting to the Senate because the losses were too severe to gloss over with the usual language. But that theory has its own hole, and it is worth sitting with, because it is really the same hole. If the Ninth died gloriously and catastrophically in a known war against a known enemy, why does no surviving source name it among the units lost? Roman writers were not shy about listing units destroyed in specific campaigns when they knew about it. The silence isn't unique to Britain. It follows the legion wherever historians try to relocate its death. Which brings us to the theory that some scholars now consider the most boring, and possibly the most likely, that the Ninth wasn't dramatically destroyed anywhere at all. That it was simply disbanded, or absorbed into other units, or quietly wound down as part of ordinary Roman military reorganization, the kind of administrative housekeeping that happened to legions throughout imperial history without any battle attached to it. Under this reading, there is no massacre, no lost battle, no ambush in the fog. There is only paperwork, and the specific misfortune that the paperwork explaining exactly what happened to this particular legion simply didn't survive the centuries the way other records did. It's a deeply unsatisfying answer if what you want is a story. But history doesn't owe anyone a dramatic ending, and the complete absence of any Roman source treating the Ninth's fate as a scandal or disaster is, if anything, evidence in this direction. Rome was loud about its disasters. Its silence here might not be a cover-up. It might just be that there was nothing loud to report. What makes this mystery genuinely alive today, rather than a closed academic argument, is that the physical search for answers hasn't stopped. In the years around 2023 and 2024, researchers using modern remote sensing technology, including LiDAR survey work that can detect ground features invisible to the naked eye, identified previously unknown Roman military structures in the area around Benechie and Aberdeenshire, deep in what would have been contested territory beyond the usual Roman frontier. These are real, legitimate findings, part of an ongoing, serious effort to map Rome's northernmost reach in Britain. What they show is evidence of Roman military activity in a region archaeologists hadn't fully accounted for. What they do not show, at least based on what has been published, is a mass grave, a legion's insignia, or definitive proof tying any specific site to the Ninth's destruction. It is genuinely exciting archaeology. It has not solved the mystery. Anyone telling you it has, especially anyone describing a dramatic 2025 excavation full of bound skeletons and a buried eagle standard, is describing something that does not exist in the archaeological record. That story has been circulating online, but it does not correspond to any real find, and it's worth being direct about that, because the actual mystery doesn't need embellishment to be compelling, and it really doesn't. Think about what's genuinely true here. A legion with 150 years of history, forged under Julius Caesar, blooded in Gaul and Spain, nearly wiped out by Boudicca and rebuilt anyway, stationed at the very edge of the known world in one of the most miserable, dangerous postings in the empire, present and accounted for on a stone in the year 108, and then never mentioned again in any surviving source anywhere, in any context. That's not embellishment. That's a historical record, full stop, and it is strange enough on its own terms to have kept professional historians arguing for 2 centuries without a resolution in sight. There's also something worth sitting with about why this particular case has stayed lodged in the public imagination, rather than fading into a footnote like a dozen other administrative mysteries from antiquity. Part of it is scale. This wasn't a handful of clerks losing a scroll. This was potentially 5,000 men, their equipment, their commanders, their families in some cases, simply ceasing to appear anywhere. Part of it is a specific character of the silence. Ancient Rome was not shy about failure when failure served a purpose, whether that purpose was assigning blame, justifying revenge, or simply processing collective grief in public. A silence is complete on a subject Rome usually couldn't stop talking about, invites speculation almost by design, even when the most likely explanation turns out to be mundane. And maybe that's a real lesson sitting underneath 2,000 years of theories about ambushes and massacres and lost eagles. Sometimes the absence of a record isn't evidence of a cover-up. Sometimes it's just evidence of how fragile the ancient world's memory really was. How much of what happened to the people who lived and fought and died under Rome's banner depended entirely on whether the right piece of parchment or the right slab of stone happened to survive a couple thousand years of fire, flood, and neglect. The Ninth Legion didn't need a conspiracy to disappear. All it needed was for one crucial record, whatever explained its fate, to be lost away so much of the ancient world was lost. So where does that leave us with an entire legion that seems to have simply stopped existing? Probably exactly where careful historians have left it for years, with several live possibilities, none of them proven, and a genuine, ongoing archaeological effort that might one day turn up something conclusive, even if it hasn't yet. The Tribes in the Fog version makes for great fiction. The Transferred and Destroyed in the East version has some real fragments behind it, and the Quiet Disbandment version, the one with no blood and no drama at all, might be the answer that actually respect the evidence best, even though it's the one nobody wants to hear. What we can say for certain is this. In 108 AD, the Ninth Legion Hispana was alive, working, present in the Roman record. And then it wasn't. Whatever happened to those 5,000 men, Rome's own silence about it has outlasted the empire itself by more than a millennium and a half. That's the actual mystery, no embellishment required, and it's still not solved. So I'll leave you with the honest version of the question, because the honest version is the more interesting one anyway. If an empire built on obsessive record-keeping could lose an entire legion without leaving so much as a scandal behind, what does that tell you about how much of the ancient world we've actually lost without ever knowing it was gone?